I remember thinking how everyone sounded like a herd of camels, people rushing by in such great numbers that it was quite challenging to keep up with my mother. If my older brother, Brett, hadn't been pulling me along by the wrist, I think I likely would have gotten lost in the crowd. My mother, Brett, and I were at the mall doing some Christmas shopping about a week before the holiday. I've always really hated crowds and hated Christmas shopping. The only good part about the trip to the stores and making my way through a sea of strangers with my family was stopping at the food court. Looking at toys and getting into the spirit would have been fun, but the mall is just way too crowded this time of year to enjoy anything without some kind of hassle. To make matters worse, my older brother was really embarrassing. I mean, he was really misbehaved and made it difficult for my mother to go anywhere. Brett was the type of child to throw a tantrum in the middle of a crowded store if he didn't get his way, even at the age of 10. Fortunately, my mom is a really good shopper, and we really didn't spend more time at the mall than what was necessary. It wasn't much long after that we had finished our fast food lunches in the overcrowded food court that the three of us headed out of the mall, Mother holding several bags in her hands and Brett still complaining over something he didn't get. Mom likely got it for him anyway, but he was always way too impatient to wait for Christmas. Halfway to the car, Brett stopped walking through the snow-covered, vehicle-filled parking lot, refusing to take another step. Instead, Brett began to make a scene in the middle of the lot, forcing my mother to drop the bags of Christmas gifts and walk over to my brother and forcibly drag him to our van. Times like this, I felt like burying my head in the snow and pretending I didn't know the people that I was with. After getting Brett into the van, my mother relieved me of guard duty over the gifts and picked them up. Although I was really curious, I didn't even take a peek. The way home really wasn't any better. Mom and brother argued back and forth the whole way, while the ridiculous holiday traffic only made the torture last even longer. My mom tried to explain the point of Christmas to Brett, but her words seemed to fall upon deaf ears. "Santa Claus watches everything you do, honey," she told him. But I don't think Brett even believed in Santa anymore. Being only 6 at the time, I still did, and could not understand how my brother could risk all his holiday joy via not getting anything from Santa because he didn't want to listen to Mom. Mom brought most of the bags upstairs when we returned home, leaving only one large bag on the living room couch. Although the tree was up and the house decorated inside and out, Mom likely picked up some last-minute items she felt she had to have. Inside that bag was tinsel for our tree, a wreath for the front door, and stockings with the names of each member of our family on them, right down to the dog and cat. Before Mom was able to come back downstairs, Brett had the bag of tinsel torn wide open and had begun to decorate the kitchen with it. After a pointless scolding from my mother and some cleaning, Mom prepared dinner for when Dad came home. We wouldn't hang the stockings until after dinner, something we did as a family each year. That night, after Dad had come home and we had all eaten, we had begun to hang our stockings above the fireplace, while Dad told me and my brother a little story. Mom had informed Dad of Brett's behavior earlier that day, and Dad had something to say about it. My father began with the story of Santa Claus, traveling around the world and delivering presents to good children, having the ability to see if you're sleeping, and all the rest that we've heard hundreds of times growing up. Yeah, Dad, I know. Santa will bring me coal," Brett finished for my father. "Okay, so you know the story of Santa. But have you heard of Krampus?" my father inquired as he hung the last stocking on the mantel. "No offense, Dad, but who the heck is Krampus?" My brother replied snidely, "Well, son, think of Krampus as an anti-Santa Claus. Krampus is a demonic-looking creature with 2 large horns protruding from either side of its head, while Santa is making his rounds to all the good little boys and girls. Krampus does the same for all the little deviants. Santa Claus brings a sack full of toys that he will empty on all the good boys and girls. Krampus carries an empty, dirty sack that he fills up with all the bad little children, and then he takes them back to his mountain lair. Both Santa and his doppelganger will leave gifts in the stockings above your fireplace," my dad said, lifting a finger in the direction of our newly hung stockings. "However, Krampus does not leave you toys and candy. He brings your family a part of your remains and leaves it for them in your stocking, hung with care. So remember, boys, do what your mother tells you, or Santa may put you on his naughty list, and Krampus handles those children," my father finished, intending to put a slight amount of fear into my brother and I. Although I think my dad intended to intimidate Brett into behaving, it was my 6-year-old self who wound up unsettled. Brett just seemed to make fun of my dad's story, telling Dad that it sounded fake and teasing me relentlessly, almost picking up on my fear. After sipping some hot cocoa by the newly lit fireplace and having some snacks at Brett's demand, my parents ushered us off to bed, reminding us to finish our cookies before we departed. Brett stole the last of mine. After climbing into my bed and my mother tucking me in, my parents wrestled and argued Brett into his on the other side of our large blue bedroom and told us both good night. Turning off the light and leaving the door open a crack, my parents left us alone and retired to the master bedroom down the hall. I watched the snow fall outside my bedroom window as Brett whispered about the evil deeds of Krampus, telling me that I had to be good or he'd tell him where to find me. Telling him to stop and telling him it was he who should be nervous didn't seem to help much. Eventually, Brett would fall asleep, leaving me petrified in the dimly lit room, watching the snow fall silently outside my bedroom window. Despite my brother's best efforts, I still dreamt of a pleasant Christmas morning with my parents, towers of presents beside the tree that sparkled in the dim morning, lights twinkling through the night and into the following day. Unfortunately, the next day and the day after that did not boast the coming of Christmas. We still had a few more days for that. After what seemed like a lifetime, however, the night of my mother's yearly Christmas Eve party was upon our home. I remember the house, just like every year, had the smells of pie and turkey lingering about the air. Also, just like every year, my brother and I were forced to dress up in some kind of stupid sweater while my parents dressed as if they were going out on a date. My folks never did entertain much. The only time they did was on Christmas Eve, making the night very important to both my parents, especially my mother. While my parents were entertaining the guests downstairs, my brother and I were upstairs, silently entering my parents' bedroom. While they were busy talking and filling drinks for various people that filled the living room, dining room, and kitchen of our home, Brett was forcing me to stand watch as he dug through a pile of wrapped boxes in my parents' closet. "No way this is mine. Hey, you want to know what you got?" Brett asked me as he carefully unwrapped one side of one of the presents, presenting him with what was inside. I really didn't want him to tell me, but he did anyway. I replied, but Brett cut in with, "It's that stupid train set thing you wanted." Brett carefully wrapped the end back up and placed tape over the old tape that had been cut with scissors that he brought with him. Usually, Brett ruined my parents' Christmas. Now, he had to go and ruin mine. 20 or so minutes went by with my older brother discovering each and every present we would receive the next day and calling it out by name as he did. I really wished we would have gotten caught. I would have just told him no or ran and told on him, but he would have beat me up for sure. Instead, I watched down that bedroom hall, being brought nearly to tears by my brother's insensitivity, wishing my parents would come upstairs. I listened to Brett finish up the last of the presents, place everything back the way it was, and tell me to follow him back downstairs. I didn't enjoy anything that night. I didn't care about the pies, pastries, or roasted meats. I didn't care about the candies, cookies, and company of family and close friends. I wanted my Christmas back. I wanted to be surprised when I opened my gifts. Some of those presents he opened, he told me were from Santa. At 6, this broke my heart. Could my parents really just be buying me presents and putting Santa's name on it? I wished so bad for Santa to be real. I knew that if Santa was real, Krampus might be too. But I didn't care. I didn't care if Krampus came and took Brett away in his dirty old sack. In fact, I wished for that too. That thought, however, was quickly replaced with a simple desire for a happy Christmas with my family. Even at such a young age, I was able to take comfort in this simple yet trademark concept. The night dwindled down to a dull murmur in the living room, most of the guests having left and the remaining members talking about the ride home in preparation to leave. As the last of the guests filed out the door, my mother and father let out a sigh of relief. My mom gave my father the task of putting the two of us to bed while she cleaned up from the party. After placing out a tray of cookies with a glass of milk for Santa, my dad finally got us into bed, bribing my mother and I with candy and promises of extra TV time for Brett the following day. He gently said goodnight and left us in our beds, under our covers on a silent Christmas Eve. Brett listened up for a long time, trying to wait for Mom and Dad to bring the presents from their room and put them under the tree. I'm not sure how late he was able to stay awake. I fell asleep well before him. When I awoke, the room was dark. The light from the hallway was not on, signaling my parents had gone to bed and were likely fast asleep. My brother could be heard snoring at the end of the room, and then I heard it with my waking ears. A thump in the attic. No, that wasn't the attic. That sounded like it came from the roof. I'm sure most of you listening to this would simply disprove the possibility before even getting out of bed. But at 6, I wanted to see if the sound was footsteps, if it was truly Santa on the roof. I sat up in my bed and stood to my feet. More thumping could be heard making its way across the roof. I wanted to beat him there. I had to. I had to find a place to hide nearby so I could watch him as he placed the presents beneath the tree. Quickly and quietly, so as to not wake my older brother, I crept from the room and snuck down the stairs towards the inviting glow of the living room, lit by a twinkling tree. I sat in silence behind my father's recliner chair, no more noises from the roof. Maybe it was just some falling snow or some other rational explanation. Then it hit me. When I came into the living room, I was so excited, I didn't even give it a passing thought. A pile of presents was already boasted beside the tray of cookies, empty, and the glass of milk, only half full. Had he really done his work that fast? I remember thinking. It had only been merely moments between the noises on the roof and my entry into the living room. That's when I noticed it. Soot falling from inside the chimney, down onto the now extinguished remainder of firewood that resided within. Someone or something was coming down the chimney. Maybe Mom and Dad just brought down their presents and ate the cookies just in case Santa didn't come. Maybe it's still him. But when I saw 2 large hooved feet hit the base of the fireplace with a thud, I knew they didn't belong to Santa Claus. With one long, almost impossible movement, a large, dark, hairy shape seemed to reach outward with its body and emerge from my parents' fireplace. The beast was tall and covered with hair from nearly head to toe, only its long, bony fingers tipped with long black claws, the 2 horns on its head sporting a hideous leather-like face, and its flesh above its grotesque hooved feet were bare of fur. It clutched a limp, dirty burlap sack in one hand and a large club in the other. I don't know why. It just slipped out. "Krampus?" I asked, ever so softly, before clasping both of my hands very tightly over my mouth. The creature turned and looked at me with its fiery, beady eyes, smirked a sinister grin, and turned its attention towards the direction of the kitchen and the stairs. I watched in a paralyzing fear as the monster slowly clomped up the stairs, burlap sack dragging on the steps behind it. It wasn't until it was out of sight that I found the courage to stand up. Once I did, it was like a momentum that I could not stop. I immediately ran up the stairs after the creature, right to my parents' room. After bursting through the door, I ran to my father's side of the bed, desperately trying to wake him up. Dad, it's Krampus. He's here for Brett. I wished he would come and now he's here. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry, Dad. Wake up, please." It was no use. I tried my mother as well. They just kept snoring. I don't know why, but they wouldn't rouse even a little, not even with me shaking them violently. I stopped trying to wake my parents. That was Brett. I ran back down the hall and into my bedroom to try and help my brother. I was stopped in my tracks by a horrifying sight. The creature had Brett by his left arm, lifting him high into the air, bringing him head level with it. Brett dangling from the creature's clawed hand. Facing my direction, Brett looked at me, pleading for my help and shrieking in terror as the thing's tongue slid from its mouth with an impossible length and began to writhe about Brett's face, frequently halting his pleas for help as it occasionally would slip over his oral cavity. I wanted to help him, but my legs refused to obey my brain. I was only 6. I was terrified beyond belief. Krampus then dropped my brother to the floor with a thump. As Brett scrambled to make his way towards me, the monster swung its large wooden club at Brett, knocking him back to the floor. I watched in shaking fear as the creature bludgeoned my brother repeatedly, Brett screaming and crying loudly in between each strike. The sounds of his bones could be heard snapping from across the room, signaled by the loud popping noises. After the monster had beaten my brother into nothing more than a bloody, whimpering mess on the floor, he picked up what was left of him off the floor and placed it into his large burlap sack. I stood like a statue as the creature walked right by me, my brother in a sack being dragged behind it, the demon smiling at me all the way. It wasn't until the monster had turned the corner of my doorway, leaving a blood trail from my brother behind it, that I let out the most powerful scream that I could muster. After that, I hit the floor in blackness. I had finally passed out from shock. The next morning, my parents awoke me on my bedroom floor. They were in a panic over the blood trail and my missing brother. I offered them an explanation, but at first, they copped it up to an elaborate prank orchestrated by my deviant older brother. They didn't believe me when they saw the large, soot-hooved prints on the living room floor originating from the fireplace. A large, bloody club on the mantel above Brett's stocking, however, did cause them pause. I stood by my mother as my father noticed something dripping from Brett's stocking, saturating the bottom of the fabric and creating a crimson puddle beneath. I think they finally believed there may have been some truth to my story when my father pulled my brother's peeled, dripping skin from his saturated stocking. Years passed before I ever opened any presents from that Christmas. However, I just recently found myself digging through my parents' attic and stumbling across some old pictures of me and my brother. Inside the large cardboard box in which it was contained were a couple of wrapped Christmas presents hidden beneath the random memorabilia. The one wrapped in snowflake wrapping paper caught my attention. It said my name, and then, from Santa. I couldn't resist. I knew it had to be one of those presents that Brett ruined for me, but just holding it in my hands brought back happy memories of my brother, despite the brat that he was at that age. I opened up the paper with care and saw the train set that I had asked for. I assumed that this was the same gift that my brother had ruined for me years before, until I read the note on the card inside. It read my name at the top, with a short note underneath. "I'm sorry this Christmas turned out so poorly for you. Here's a gift that I hope will help make it a little bit better. I'm sorry your brother nearly ruined your holiday cheer. I, too, can empathize. I know how evil a brother can be. Yours truly, Santa." It happened again. He came back. Concealed by the shadow of blustery night, the monster crept quietly into my parents' house with malicious intent. I came to know this creature from my childhood, studied it, the face of evil that I had hoped I would never see again. When I was a boy, I had an older brother named Brett. Brett, well, wasn't the best behaved kid. He wasn't a monster or anything like that. Brett just made mischief, constantly. It was one Christmas season when I was about 6 years old that Brett left my life for good, and it was my fault. My father warned us that year about a malevolent spirit, the counterpart to Santa, a hulking creature on hooved feet named Krampus, who stole naughty children away from their homes on Christmas Eve. Brett obviously didn't believe him and teased me right into the night before Christmas. That night, I prayed for Krampus to come, and come he did. That was the last time I ever saw my brother. It was also the last Christmas that I celebrated for a long while. But time and context bring about unforeseen changes in perspective, and raising a child of my own now, who of course wants to experience the joy of the holiday season, I could not deny him, despite my tragedies. Well, it was 2 days before Christmas, and my son, along with 3 billion other children that year, wanted the newest, quite expensive hot toy for the season, some robotic stuffed animal or something. The thing was, the little beasts were of course sold out everywhere. I swear toy companies do this shit on purpose, create a limited supply so as to increase demand and hype, all at the expense of the perpetual grievous hearts of thousands of children Christmas morning. It was a good thing for my son, Eric, that I was assured to have the means necessary to procure one at nearly the last minute. Sure, I would be forced to fork over double the price to a greedy scalper that I selected online, but I was able to put my son's mind at ease by telling him that if he was good, Santa would bring him all the things that he wanted. It's good to have a good-paying job. Well, of course, Christmas fell on a weekday this year, and being one of the lower guys on the totem pole in my new position, I was locked in for work every day leading up to Christmas. This meant I had limited time to shop and even less time with my family. Previous years leading up to this one, my work schedule, albeit for much less money, allowed for time off during the holiday season. I must have taken the extra free time for granted because I didn't exactly realize how much time I had on hand to make Christmas for my wife and son. This holiday season, I would have to slave behind my desk, desperately trying to acquire everything I needed via the office Wi-Fi and inflated expenses for overnight holiday shipping. The only real sign that I had indicating that it was nearing Christmas was the ever-increasing snowstorm outside. Battling the roads, the holiday traffic, and getting home in time for a good night's hot meal seemed all the more arduous and daunting the more the day dragged on. To make matters worse, Christmas week in my kind of work is slow, to say the very least, leaving me in tedium and boredom most of the day while I awaited the telephone to ring, expecting my boss on the other end at any minute to make sure that I was still at work. Well, amongst my plentiful free time and online shopping, I was able to finally make my purchase for the hot robotic toy for Eric. Since the last time I looked, the guy was asking 3 times the retail price. I had contacted him earlier in the week, letting him know that I wished to purchase it, and he reassured me that he had more than enough of them on hand. Now, the asshole wanted a whopping triple the original price, claiming supply and demand, causing his surplus to run short. The extent of holiday greed knows no bounds, and my job may pay well, but not that well. Unable to find another source at the last moment, I was resigned to foregoing the present and basically giving my kid an IOU for Christmas morning. Well, that fits easily into a stocking, I thought to myself whimsically. Hours of frustration and mental wrestling over the matter later, I at least had one good thing to look forward to: the end of the day and returning home. Despite the abundance of snow falling from the dark gray canopy above, traffic was what could be conceived of as out of control. And to top it all off, it looked as though the plow trucks had given up, deciding to wait until the whole thing blew over, so to speak. Frustrated, I pounded my fist against the radio knob, not in the mood for festive tunes. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, all right, I sarcastically thought to myself. I started celebrating Christmases again when my son was only 2 years old, and each of those Christmases thereafter, despite a lack of funds and subsequently extravagant gifts, they all seemed to be better, more wholesome, and somehow closer to perfect. This Christmas, one wouldn't even know that we had an increased quality of life, as each and every step along the way revealed a new pitfall for me to stumble into, further skewing what could have been the perfect Christmas I so desperately desired. I was just about at the 7th stoplight from the parking lot of where I work when a text alert stole my focus. Now, I'm not typically the type to text and drive, but once I saw who it was from and what it was about, I was practically forced to reply. I had opted to receive text updates regarding my son's desired Christmas gift, and this message told me that one had just come up for sale. I knew it wouldn't last long. I tapped the link to the website and began fiddling with my wallet. A sudden stop and a loud noise prompted my attention away from my phone, having just rear-ended a blue coupe. The ensuing mess could have led one to believe that the president was in town for the holidays, because with the influx of traffic, combined with my mishap on such a main strip, coalesced into a situation that caused traffic to now back up as far as the eye could see behind me. The policeman certainly had no issue telling me at least 3 times that the accident was my fault, and the constant stream of cars that crawled past had no reservations about beeping at me and or flipping me off, having put a moderate hindrance on their travel time. Once the report had been made and the tow truck had been called, I was now tasked with finding a ride home. Once my wife was on her way, I logged back into the website to complete my purchase again. They were already sold out. It must have been pretty easy to tell that I was in a foul mood, because my wife seemed particularly comforting and understanding. This is how she usually is, but this instance was different. I explained about my day, Eric's present, everything. That's when she hit me with it. Almost certainly the reason for her increased compassion and pliability. My in-laws were originally coming to stay during New Year's for an extended visit. Not only had they changed their plans in order to arrive before Christmas, they were apparently already at my house, awaiting our return, currently watching Eric. Now, I certainly can't go as far as to say that I get along with my in-laws. In fact, quite the opposite. When I thought that they were coming the following week, I was psychologically prepared for that, and therefore enjoying the Christmas season all the more prior to their arrival. Well, trying to anyway. Now, I had nearly no time to mentally adjust myself at all, and would be at the whim of their backhanded comments until they left after the new year. When I got home, I was in no mood to entertain company, but unfortunately, I wasn't left with an option. After setting my briefcase on the floor by the stairs and hanging up my coat, I greeted both my mother-in-law and father-in-law warmly, not letting on even a tad that I didn't really care for their presence. Roger, my wife's father, always spoke down to me, but in a way that he could always deny it, should I decide to call him out on it, painting me the bad guy. Being a great spin artist is just a component of being a retired salesman, I suppose. His wife, Margot, consistently attempted to talk my wife into leaving me whenever I happened to not be around, even now with us being married for nearly 6 years. I don't think that woman will ever accept me as good enough for her daughter. But Eric liked having his grandparents around, and there was no way I could deny them to him, even if he always seemed to get very rambunctious whenever they were in his presence. Of course, like all grandparents, they insisted it was within their right to spoil. But grandparents can always just leave when the child acts up, or at the very least, come complain to my wife and I when he does, a byproduct of their own devices. Well, we at least made it through dinner without incident. It wasn't until afterwards, outside having a cigarette with Roger, that the belligerent backhanded comments were finally initiated, mentioning how and why I could wait so long to get my son something for Christmas. I told my wife everything that had transpired on the car ride home, and I knew that at some point she must have mentioned it to her father, something I wasn't too pleased with at the time. It wasn't like I got him nothing, which I made sure to voice as my retort. The son of a bitch just snuffed his cigarette into a nearby snowbank, ignoring the ashtray at hand, and scoffed at himself with a snicker and a smile as he walked off. He didn't say a word, but his body language said it all, and I wanted to punch him in the face for it. Taking my time with my last few drags, relishing a few moments alone outside, the crisp air of the dark winter night kissing my exposed skin, it was nearly invigorating. But looking off into that dark, snow-covered forest landscape, the ominous shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the street lamp's edge, the monsters I knew that lurked there, somewhere. I couldn't help but think back on my brother once again. Being a topic I try to avoid, even with myself, this retreading of unwanted memories hastened my return indoors with a new resolve to put up with my in-laws. Once back indoors, I found myself still alone and hearing the murmured clutter of several humans making noise, still reminding me of a herd of animals without cadence. I knew everyone to be in the living room waiting for me. It wasn't quite Christmas Eve yet, but Grandma and Grandpa insisted on reading aloud "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Sure, it was for Eric's benefit, but my wife insisted that I spend time with her and her parents, so I knew that they weren't going to begin until I made my entrance and sat down. After my glass of nog was about halfway full, I decided it would be the perfect night for a little octane boost to take the edge off. So, I grabbed the bottle of brandy and proceeded to top off my glass. I put the bottle back and lifted the glass, taking a nice, long, healthy slug. Now, I was ready.
"'Twas the night before Christmas,"
Roger began.
"Do I really have to listen to that story again?"
Eric queried his mother. At first, my wife had a very shocked, almost scornful expression on her face. This was followed by telling Eric how rude he was being, telling him to be polite and explaining the meanings of tradition, all before apologizing to her mother and father for his behavior.
"That's right, buddy. It's especially important to be good this time of year, or Krampus will come and take you away,"
Roger followed up, and I felt the blood draining from my head and my eyes widen in horror.
"Who's Krampus?"
Eric asked.
"That's enough, Roger."
I tried to interrupt, but the man plodded onward as if he didn't hear me at all, and I knew he did.
"Well, Krampus is the evil counterpart to Santa. He has big horns and hooved feet, and he's covered in between in thick, dark fur. Little boys and girls who make Santa's naughty list make Krampus's Christmas Eve visit list, checking off names one by one as he steals all the bad little children away," Roger finished. This description of the monster was so spot on that it nearly mimicked my own vivid recollections, causing me to question whether or not he had seen the beast firsthand as well. But I knew better. For if so, there's no way he would be telling the story now. "Roger, please,"
I began, but he just followed up by shouting towards the ceiling as if speaking to some unholy god.
"Krampus of dark Christmas night, please come and take this disobedient child away."
Roger finished. My wife, Eric, and Margot laughed. I personally did not find the instance even remotely humorous. My wife, with whom I've shared parts of my tragic Christmas past with, shifted her attentions swiftly to me and immediately lost her jovial expression.
"Dad, can we please change the subject?"
she insisted, glancing once more back in my direction. Now, Roger, via my wife, was also privy to some of the knowledge regarding my Christmas misfortunes, and he retained no sympathy for me in this regard. Granted, no one really knew the true details of my childhood trauma, but everyone knew that my brother disappeared at Christmas, subsequently causing sensitivity. There really was no benevolent excuse for Roger, especially when he next implied that I should just get over my hang-ups, and that he was just having a little fun. It didn't matter what he said. The damage was already done. The following night would be Christmas Eve, and now there were secret preparations to be made. During the day, while my wife prepared a feast and made sure that all the decorations were perfect, putting holiday jingles on the radio accompanying the ambience and a holiday theme, I too made myself ready. I put the finishing touches on the lights and had resigned myself to helping wrap Christmas presents later in the evening. I also stocked up on other essentials, such as gathering ammunition for my 12-gauge, securing a few feet of rope, and so on. A Christmas comedy film kept coming to mind, but I feared that what would visit us tonight would be far more dreadful than a couple of fumbling thieves. The day, though, did proceed without a hitch. Eric was more than mindful of both us and his grandparents. The meal was as delicious as it was surprisingly enjoyable to eat. No off-comments from the in-laws, no fighting between mother and daughter. From the outside looking in, it may have seemed like a Hallmark-worthy picturesque event. But there was more about what was on the outside of those windows looking in than what the ambience let on. Lying awake in my bed, once the clock read 12, I assumed everyone to be asleep. Presents were wrapped and beneath the tree, my wife lightly snoring beside me, and not a single noise coming from anywhere else in the household. Sitting up and taking in the silent scene of the snow falling quietly outside my bedroom window, I couldn't help but remember that classic tale, "'Twas the night before Christmas." At least I hadn't heard the iconic thump on the roof, because on this night, it wasn't Santa Claus that I expected to pay us a visit, all the while wishing that Christmas wasn't even a thing. Creeping downstairs, there was no way that I could have known that Eric was awake. The boy was good to stay incognito, that was for sure, because as I rounded the corner at the bottom of the stairs, I spied my son sitting ever so quietly in wait for Santa from behind my recliner chair. The amazing thing was, there were several presents beneath the tree that I did not recognize. Margot and Roger had gone to bed hours ago, and neither was the type for a late-night trip out of bed. My wife had retired before me, so this limited the options of who could have left them. Maybe Santa had come instead of Krampus. This thought put my restless mind at ease, just for a moment, but not so much that I was deterred and turned for bed. It was a good thing that I didn't, because a moment later, my son let out a gasp as his eyes went wide at something stirring in the chimney that sent snow and ash falling down in clumps to the bed of the fireplace. I watched my son stare with breathless anticipation, and my own heart skipped a few beats. Not wanting to terrify my son, I approached him in a more inquisitive manner. "Hey, buddy, what are you doing?" I asked from less than 5 feet away. Eric practically jumped out of his skin, startled, having not seen me coming at all. "Dad, what are you doing? I'm sorry I got out of bed," Eric stammered. I grabbed him by the shoulders and started telling him to go hide somewhere. But it was too late. A loud clomp noise turned my gaze towards the direction of the fireplace, in which resided 2 fur-covered legs ending in hooved feet. Both Eric's and my own words fell silent, both paralyzed by fear. Eric, afraid of the unknown, I, due to having knowledge of exactly what was coming next. But nothing did come next. Not right away, anyway. Those monstrous cloven feet didn't move for what felt like an eternity, but it was only seconds later that something truly unsettling occurred. After my son had gone to bed, along with everyone else, it was me that placed the presents under the tree. This was by design, as it allowed me to set up my trap uninterrupted. A snare made out of thick rope, set within the since extinguished fireplace. Now, of course, I knew that no thickness of rope would contain the beast for long, but I had hoped it would hold him long enough to get in a shot or two. Instead, the particles of ashes still fell and fluttered about his hooves, only now intertwined with small flecks of something that sparkled bright in the near dark, like glitter. Nearly ready to simply take a shot at his feet, something both astonishing and horrifying happened. The nearly concealed rope began to move, almost writhing in place, as if the object were now alive. I lifted my gun head level, lining up the sights, and that's when the entire length of rope shot out at me like a rabid animal, wrapping itself around my ankles. The lights on the tree dimmed, almost going out, and the house went suddenly cold enough to see one's breath. And the whole, large, dark, hair-covered form seemed to reach out from the fireplace until all of his terrifying mass stood heaving with every breath in my living room. He was bare of anything but fur, from his cloven feet to nearly his abdomen, his claws exposed past the long sleeves of a tattered garment that enveloped his monstrous form, from a little below his waist to the top of his head, shrouding his face and expression in the hood. 2 large, goat-like horns protruding from either side. The monster lifted his head just a little, just enough for me to see his mouth and jutting fangs. That's when Eric let out a blood-curdling scream that should have woken the whole household. The monster gave a small smirk, growled a very slight snicker that coincided with a small puff of vapor in the frigid air that now occupied my home. The sight was picturesquely horrifying, perfect in its unsettling of equilibrium. "Eric, run!" I yelled. But I didn't need to. Eric had already taken off down the hall like a shot. Bound and tangled on the living room floor, I once again raised my firearm, the shotgun I had been carrying since I had left my bedroom, and pulled both triggers. I honestly think the shot affected me more with the recoil than it did that monster, because the creature just stood there, unfazed and utterly unharmed, like the buckshot didn't even hit him at all. I was now frozen, awaiting my fate for getting in his way, but the creature stomped towards and then right by me, only smiling down at me as he did. I struggled and fought with the bindings around my ankles as Krampus slowly plodded into the hallway towards Eric's room. By the time I had gotten free, Krampus had disappeared. Only the waning noises of hooves against hard wood decreasingly remained. I wrestled with the restraints on my legs. The magic that bound me in the first place was gone, but a tangled mess, not unlike that of a ball of Christmas lights, held my efforts at bay. Finally, I did manage to free myself, and as I ran down the hallway, pursuing the beast, I fumbled to reload the 12-gauge. The more time I wasted, the more clumsy I got, and so on. Now, panicking over the state of my son, shotgun reloaded, I lifted the barrel and headed towards Eric's room. But it was already too late. A huge, dark mass with 2 protruding horns on either side of its head now blocked my path down the corridor. Lifted high in one of his clawed hands was a dirty, burlap sack, nearly full and spasming wildly in movement. From within, I could hear muffled, panic-stricken sounds, audibly sounding just like Eric, like he was trying desperately to call for help. I aimed down the sights of the barrel and pointed the gun at the monster once more. Krampus shifted the position of his burlap sack and enclosed captive only slightly, putting my son right between him and my shotgun. I knew that if I pulled the trigger, that I would probably shoot Eric. I stood there, hesitantly unsure of my next move. Krampus gave me one more sinister smirk before simply melting away into what looked and smelled like smoke from a wood fire, accompanied by flickering, dancing embers and all. I choked as the smoke enveloped me on all sides, and by the time I had lifted my shirt to my face, the foul-smelling, thick gray mist had dissipated, and I saw that Krampus had gone with it, simply vanishing. I turned in all directions, soon looking behind me, and there, in the living room adjacent the tree, I saw that same dark cloud thicken and then consolidate into a solid mass with 2 large horns. "Krampus!" I yelled out. None of this made any sense. Eric was not a bad child, not even in the loosest sense. Eric was genuinely a good kid. He loves Christmas, unlike me. That's when Krampus turned ever so slightly and showed me just one of his gleaming eyes with a smirk. It was at that very moment that I understood. But it was far too late. A second later, he had slipped back into the fireplace and disappeared, burlap sack and all. I fell to my knees and sobbed with realization. Krampus didn't come for Eric. He'd really come for me. This was my punishment for resenting Christmas, frowning upon holiday sentiments, and my wish of ending Christmas. This was all my fault. It goes without saying that on Christmas morning, the tone was a very somber one. Eric had gone missing, and of course, I could tell no one of what actually happened. Who would believe me? Likely due to the pressure of her parents and the great loss of our child, my wife left me only a few months later. But in all honesty, this could be a good thing. I mean, I'm devastated at both the loss of my son and my marriage. But now, I'll have more time to prepare. Because I'm going to get my son back. And next Christmas, I'll be ready. It's been a long time coming, but Christmas is finally upon me. I've been waiting for this moment, for this day, all year, but not for the reasons and purposes as most others. Most can't wait for the coming of the holidays. I could do without. My anticipation is not sourced from excitement of joyful thoughts of Santa and presents. Instead, mine is the byproduct of apprehension and dread, the ever-looming terror that he would arrive instead of Santa. Only this year, I was counting on it. As I wrote my desires on that seemingly unimportant piece of scrap paper, my intentions coming to fruition now, I could not help but recollect on all that had transpired, leading me to this exact point in my life, with all of its absurdity. When I was little, I had an older brother. I say had because he disappeared. No, was taken on Christmas when I was only 6 years old. My parents never reconciled what happened to my older brother, Brett, always holding out hope that he would someday return, or that they would find out conclusively what happened to him. It's funny, really. I mean, they had found my brother's peeled skin first thing Christmas morning, and yet still held out hope that he could somehow be alive. I knew better, and hope was something I was not afforded. I saw Brett get taken after being horrendously bludgeoned by that monster, stuffed into a dirty burlap sack, and whisked away to someplace unknown. I tried so hard to forget what happened, but I couldn't. For so long, I just couldn't bring myself to celebrate Christmas, as it was associated with all too painful memories. That is, until my son was born. Eric was the light in my darkness, a beacon for what the holidays truly meant, the love of family, and I could not deny him the joys of the holidays. Things were finally back to normal, for a few years anyway. But last Christmas, was one for the books. I couldn't get Eric the present he so desperately desired. I wrecked my car, and my in-laws had come to town early for seemingly no other purpose than to berate me for all that they perceived as my failings and shortcomings. I wished Christmas wasn't even a thing anymore. Too many of my previous experiences with the holiday had been wholly unpleasant, and I would have done anything to end Christmas right then and there, forever. I think that's what called him back. Eric never did anything wrong. Not enough to warrant that monster coming for him. Krampus had come, once again, only this time, not for my brother, but for me. My punishment, to have the true meanings of all my future Christmases taken away, just as I had wished. Eric was taken from our lives in the cold and silent night, while the rest of the house slept, completely unrousable. I was either blamed or deemed too much a source of pain, and my beloved wife left me. But now, it's just me. And if he comes for me again, there will be no one else to suffer his wrath. And this is exactly what I wanted. Placing the paper into the envelope and licking the glue, I sealed its contents and placed it into that ornate cardboard box, designed with snowflakes and themed scenery. The flag was up, and I was set. Tonight was my last chance. As I lay there, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I knew he would not come until I had truly fallen asleep. But thoughts of broken boughs, humbugging children as they offered me season's greetings, and the best laid plans kept coming to mind. I must have tossed and turned for hours, and honestly had begun to give up hope on finding slumber on a night that promised such significance. But the adrenaline must have subsided, and the result of its absence birthed a fatigue too strong to ignore, even by the most active of minds. I had finally fallen asleep. When I awoke, I immediately knew why. I knew the sound all too well. Someone was on my roof, and it couldn't have been Santa. Not for me, anyway. I had been bad all year. I made sure of it. I yelled at the elderly. I poked fun at those for despicable reasons, and I refused to participate in Christmas at all, making sure to express my disdain. Now, something was slowly plodding across my roof. It was time. He was finally here. I had been waiting all year for this. I had been waiting for him since last year. The night was finally upon me, and now, in the midst of all that I hoped for, the reality of it began to sink in. The danger and all that was at stake, and my heart began to pound within my chest so hard that I could swear I could see my chest throbbing in movement, its beats visible to the naked eye. I began to think that maybe I had nothing to fear from Krampus, that he and I would never in fact have the confrontation that I desired so desperately, as I may suffer a myocardial infarction instead. But of course, the thought was gone as fast as it had surfaced, sunken back into the recesses of my mind. I had disregarded personal safety a long time ago. Quickly, I ran from my bedroom and towards the stairs that descended to the first floor, near to the living room and the tree, well, what was left of it. In the days leading up to Christmas, I did indeed decide to decorate my house with a Christmas tree. No decorations or tinsel, nothing special, just some twinkle lights. However, it should be noted here that I did indeed use a live tree, a real evergreen, and before making my way to bed on this night, I made sure to destroy it. I broke off its branches, snapped the trunk in half, and left the twinkling rubbish in a heap in the corner, still plugged in, a symbolic representation of what Christmas was to me. This was truly the only participation I could be attributed to this year, but this as well was well calculated. Everything was, and as I hunched behind that heaping pile of pine branches and wires, I marveled at all I had gone through. Marvel was quickly replaced by dread, for when I saw soot falling to the ashes at the base of the fireplace from the chimney flue above, I knew that he was here. Despite my earlier actions, I knew who it was sure of it, and this was reinforced when two black, cloven hooves the size of dinner plates fell to that ash bed within the fireplace with a loud, resounding thud. Ash and dust kicked up into a cloud when they did, but instead of resettling, the opaqueness and size of the dust cloud grew. Soon, it had become so thick that it was nearly a solid form and blockaded all sight of the fireplace beyond it. Small flecks of glowing red flickered in and out of existence from within the soot cloud, like dancing embers from some hellish flame, and I immediately remembered the events of last year, the cloud of wood smoke that my son had disappeared with, and now this smoke had returned. I grinned. Slowly, the smoke began to solidify, condensing inward on itself in the center of my living room, congealing before me, not more than 6 feet away. As it did, the smoke began to clear as well, dissipating into increasing translucence, a form within, now birthing into shape. Those cloven black hooves now led upwards with hairy, muscular calves that extended to a soot-gray trim that lined his dirty red robe. Horns protruded from the cloud that resided more than 7 feet from the floor, and claw-tipped, long, thin digits extended from the ends of his long sleeves. Over his shoulder, he carried what looked like an empty, filthy burlap sack and dragged it along the floor at his other side. Gripped by his right claw was a girthy, crude wooden club. The monster now stood heaving in my living room, just as I had wanted all year. From beneath his dark hood, I could see the glint of his beady, gleaming eyes with only fury and malicious intent within, and his toothy, unnerving, sinister grin. I could tell that he had been waiting for me as well. The two of us, me staring down a dark god of the holiday season, stood there in my living room, glaring at one another and sizing the other one up. This had been a long time coming. The monster lifted his club high into the air, ready to bludgeon me to the floor, but his lumbering size telegraphed his movements, and I was able to dodge his swing with ease, jumping to the right and near to the twinkling pieces of destroyed Christmas tree. In one fluid motion, the beast swiped his bludgeon across the floor to his left, swinging once again at me, leaving me no chance to react, and knocked me the rest of the way across the room, hitting the wall with a thud. Luckily, I had just enough time to grasp it, and when he clomped towards me once more, ready to take his final swing, I took the evergreen branch now held firmly in my hands and plunged it forward, aiming for his abdomen above me. Krampus ceased his movements mid-swing and took a step backward, causing the pointed end of the pine branch to bury deep into one of those muscular calves. The beast howled so loud, I had to cover both ears with my hands, subsequently removing the blood-tipped tree limb from the monster's flesh and dropping it to the floor in front of me. In the same movement, Krampus reached down to nurse his leg with his hands, seemingly in more pain than I thought the creature could feel, causing him to also drop that which he held as well, the wooden club and the empty sack. Knowing that this was my chance, and that I may never get another one, I began to climb to my feet, reaching for that pine branch, ready to end this once and for all. Before I could get myself upright, however, I saw that empty sack rattle in movement for only a fraction of a second, before opening wide at the top, like a giant parasite searching for its next meal, and a dark shape leaped out of it. Most of the being's details had eluded me in the dim lighting, assisted by his fast movements, and was wholly unknown to me, until now, right upon me, face to face with a dark intent, unclawing me to shreds with its 2 taloned hands. Only as I desperately tried to fight it off, to save myself, I was able to get a good enough look at it. The childlike beast looked similar to Krampus, enough to be its kin, with 2 protruding horns and nails upon its digits, like the claws on a cat. The creature was less than half his height, but powerfully strong, and unlike his larger counterpart, he had no fur upon his skin. In fact, it appeared to be lacking skin at all. Blackened muscle and sinew comprised its form. Pointed, almost filed down teeth emerged from within its mouth as it repeatedly tried to ensnare my flesh between them, and its eyes were a deep brown, almost hazel, instead of fiery red. But there was something else very different about this particular monster. Details I was able to gain even while frantically attempting to fight it off. Elements presented it as somewhat familiar to me, somehow. As the thing growled and slashed at me again, it gave a smirk, and then in that momentary semblance between furious strikes, did its features, his features, make themselves known, informing me why he had seemed so familiar while being foreign, how my subconscious had known before my awareness had caught up, and as unreal and impossible as the notion was, somehow I knew it to be the truth. This thing, this monster, still attacking me like a rabid animal, was Brett, my older brother. The size of his form had seemed to not have grown an inch, while the rest of him seemed to be heavily modified and disfigured through both magical and torturous means. "Brett!" I screamed at him as he kept slashing and biting at my flesh, just barely blocked by my hands and arms as we thrashed about on the floor like fish on dry land. He kept at me, violently and unfazed. "Brett, it's me! Don't you remember?" The monster slowed his attacks and now focused his eyes upon mine. "Your little brother," I finished my inquiry, hoping to spark whatever memory might remain within him. The creature that was once my brother slowed his attack, tilted his head at me, and stopped completely, lost in a moment of hesitation. Krampus, having had his moment to recover from my attack, roared from the other side of the room. The heavy clomps indicated he was once again approaching me. What was left of my brother gave me a wink, turned with a leap, and lunged at his master, Krampus. He must have finally recognized me, for his selfless attack on the holiday monstrosity left me with enough time to do what I had to. While the 2 creatures engaged in a fierce combat with one another, the dark elf version of my brother beginning to take less of a beating and more of a brutal attack, I leapt towards Krampus's empty sack that lay upon the floor. I greedily and hastily opened it and peered inside, expecting to see a portal to another world or some impossible void to nothingness. Instead, I was both shocked and relieved, and I happily pulled my son, Eric, free from within. I couldn't explain it. He seemed unharmed, almost unfazed, and at first confused me with his questions, a result of what I would later realize as a year-long gap in his memories, as if placed in some kind of magical stasis. But before I could truly catch up, before I could answer a single query, I heard a loud screech before a subsequent sickening crunch. Krampus had killed my brother, snapping him in half like a number 2 pencil. My instinct was to run to my brother's side, to attack Krampus with my rage, but I instead remained calculated, and as he turned towards me and my son, before he made a movement in my direction, I was already gathering that broken evergreen branch from the floor, tipped in Krampus's blood. I had done my research, and every legend had a few things in common, concurrent throughout each. One of which being the only way to kill Krampus, an evergreen stake tipped in the blood of the beast himself, and the true reason for my buying a Christmas tree only to destroy it. A veritable weapons cache piled idly and unassumingly in the corner. At first glance, simply a symbol for my holiday resentment, serving as simultaneously a bait and a hook. Krampus was now within reach, but he was too late. I leapt through the air, I think before the beast truly understood what was going on, assured of his victory through centuries of precedent, and plunged that tree branch deep into his unguarded, fur-covered abdomen. The monster bellowed in agony and swiped a gigantic paw at me once more, this time connecting with me and knocking me to the floor. I landed hard with a thud, but after a single bounce, my attention refocused on my son, scrambling over to him in order to blockade him from any subsequent onslaught to follow. However, Krampus simply crumpled where he stood, like an inanimate pile of fur and ash. The remnants of what remained of my brother lay in pieces in a bloody heap that seemed to be evaporating like hydrogen peroxide, vanishing into a mist that dissipated as fast as it had formed. I held my son close, not saying a word. Eric was first to speak, and as I suspected, had no memories of the past year, as if he had skipped through time. He wondered where Mom was, if Grandma and Grandpa were still sleeping, but all I could muster to tell him was, "It's gonna be okay now." Despite all that happened, when I heard the faint sound of sleigh bells ringing in the air outside, I could not help but wonder, somewhat in apprehension, but mostly in awe. A monstrous shout from behind me caused me to turn with a start, and once I did, my eyes were met with the once again standing form of holiday horror, the Christmas beast, Krampus, the pine branch still embedded deep into his abdomen, his fiery eyes fixated on me with hatred and malice. Just as the monster reached towards me with one claw open and extended, sparkles of light, like flecks of dust, danced about the pine branch, still stuck within the beast's form. And just as quickly, before he could lay a tipped digit on me, I watched that evergreen stake move upward on its own, shifting the point closer to the center of the beast's chest. Krampus once again dropped with a thud and disappeared almost instantly into a cloud of wood smoke and the dying fire embers within. It was finally over. In the stillness of night beyond the window glass, I could have sworn I heard a faint, bellowing laughter of some joyous being, a deep chuckle that seemed to embody the holiday spirit. He had come and had answered the letter I left on Eric's behalf for him in that little cardboard mailbox. It worked, and the magic of the holidays is what really saved us in the end. Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.